Jody? Jude? Okay, let's come over here. Jody, come outside.
Behind my bed.
That's your money? £40?
Thanks. Yeah. All right. Hi. Chag Sameach, everybody. Are you filming? Chag Sameach. First of all, welcome to the first and probably only Shiur and Shmooze barbecue. Meatless barbecue. I want to first of all thank Jody, whose house this is, for hosting again. Being the hostess and the mostess, Jody.
She's over there.
Thank you. And any yelping is there, Jody's dog, who also wants to join in. And thank you, Gedaliah, once again for being here and in the same place.
Yeah, right.
And at the last minute saying, yeah, I can talk about BaOmer. I would love to. Today we are collecting 10 shekels for Hatene school that Gedaliah will tell us about, and also 10 shekels to help with the food and drink, or as much as you want to give, for both. And that's about it. I'll hand you over to Gedaliah, who will tell you more about Tene. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. And please turn off your mobile phones.
Okay, so those of you that are not familiar with Hatena, Hatena is a very wonderful school that you should be very thankful you know nothing about. It's a school here in Jerusalem for children that are rated usually as 100% handicap. And the people who work at the school are angels, although they hide their wings under their shirts. And they are really underpaid, overworked, and give with their love and their neshama something just very beautiful, very touching. And I had a child until he passed away that was there for many years. And during that time, it was really an experience of an otherworldly nature to see Muslim parents and what they call Chiloni and what they call Haredi, all these words I kind of hate. It just sort of transcended it because of the nature of the children and the joy of the children and the life of the children. It really taught the parents a lot of lessons of what life is all about and the value of life and how precious life is. And life being finite really makes it even more precious because money comes and goes, but time only goes. You know, I always say as I get older, there was an expression I remember people used to say that time flies when you're having fun. As you get older, you realize time flies regardless having fun, not having fun. It just flies. Right, I hear it now. So that's why it's just really important to appreciate what we have in our lives, and that which we can do is to live life to the fullest and to make the most out of it. Okay, I'm not quite sure how that segues to BaOmer, but I hope this class will go over well. I didn't have much time, and for those of you that have come to my classes before, you know I try my best because I really respect your time, and I'm not sure I would come to my own class. So if you come to the class, then I really like to prepare something with original material or stuff I've never used before, and stuff that I hope will have some good takeaway and really make the evening something special, like little nuggets of eternal gold for the neshama. So the thing I was thinking about, I'll just get the really bad joke out of the way, was, and sometimes you know you see these things, you never think about them your entire life, and all of a sudden when you think about them, you suddenly think like, wow. So I was trying to think like, where do you see a hint in BaOmer to this idea of building bonfires? I mean, where are why bonfires? Maybe we should like irrigate ponds or something. But why do we make bonfires? And then I realized, well, it's so obvious. How do you build a bonfire? With logs. Right? So that was the log. That was log BaOmer. All right, you'll edit that out, right? Okay. Tov. But the truth of the matter is that, I don't know if you had a chance to see the note, but what we're going to try to do tonight, I'm going to give you an overall view, so that way we kind of have a little tracking system going on. We want to take a look at what are according to Chazal, what are the 5 main events that occurred on BaOmer, because we know that the Mukubalim teach us that every time an event occurs in the physical world, it opens a portal in that moment in time for similar energy to also manifest itself. So therefore, if certain events are occurring, like the Tisha B'Av events or the Tu B'Av events and so on, if they're all occurring in the same time, it means that at some level they're all linked in the same roots So we're going to take a look at what are the 5 primary items or events that occur within this Lag BaOmer that highlight the essence of what has become this kind of mystical holiday. And then from within that, we want to understand what is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's uniqueness within all of that. Why is he suddenly the standout among all of the people of that particular time? And then when we kind of go through that entire lesson and see through the lesson of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, we see how the answers, the various reasons and where the sources of these points are. Then we're going to conclude the class, if you're still awake at that point, we're going to conclude the class with the algorithm, the magical mystical number of 33, which is really the underlying current that makes all this happen. I have to just tell you on a personal level, I don't know why, I'm sure everybody had lucky numbers when you were a kid, or maybe still. I know when I used to play basketball all the time, I always had one lucky number, and it was always 33. I always thought, well, I didn't know Hebrew in those days, but later when I realized that Gimel was 3, so I thought, well, maybe Gedaliah Gurfein, so GG, 3-3. But it was always such an amazing number in my life that to the point once I remember specifically 1974, sitting not far from you in Or Sameach, a couple years earlier, and telling somebody about the power of 33 in my life. And as I said that, there was a little sticker on the table, and I remember peeling it off, and there was the number 33. So somehow this number 33, at least in my life, has always kind of been a big influence, but it's really a very powerful number in the Jewish people as well. In fact, one of the things which is kind of interesting, but it's not one of the main reasons of Lag BaOmer, is that the Ramah, the Mechaber of the Ashkenazi law of the Shulchan Aruch, lived to the age of 33. He wrote 33 books, and he died on the 33rd Omer. This was his yahrzeit of the Ramah. So we'll get more into the number 33, but first let's take a look at what are the main points of the holiday. Now, the first thing that's sort of interesting just to underlie it is that Iyar is one of the 2 months in the year that really does not have a holiday per se. Heshvan is the other one, and Heshvan is earmarked for a very big holiday in the future. But Iyar is the only month that doesn't have a holiday, and yet it's the only month in the year where we make a blessing on every single one of the days. Even though we are doing it through the process of counting of the Omer, the reality is we bless every day of Iyar. And so it becomes a very magical and a very special month in and of itself. And in the month of Iyar, which is the 33rd of the Omer, is the 18th of Iyar. Lag BaOmer always comes out on the 18th of Iyar, so in a way it's the chai, it's the life of the month itself. So there's something in this month of Iyar which captures in its life this magical formula called Lag BaOmer. So I'm sure you're all familiar, but I'll go over them again, and I want to highlight the points. What are the main things that people speak about when they talk about Lag BaOmer? Well, there were the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva who are dying, and all of a sudden the plague magically ended on Lag BaOmer. It was the day after the Jewish people had come out of Egypt that the man started to fall from heaven. It was the day that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Reb Eliezer came out of the cave that they ran into where they initially had fled from the Romans, was on Lag BaOmer. It was the day that Rebbe Akiva gave smicha, he gave ordination to the 5 students that now replaced the lost 24,000 students. And of those students, one of them was Reb Shimon, another one was Reb Meir, and so on and so on. And it was also the day that the Zohar was revealed into the world. So these are the 5 main elements, and we're going to take a look in the class tonight to see how these elements really all source from the same central concept, and what does that represent, and how can we have something personal from that means something in our daily lives. So the first thing I wanted to sort of do is to raise a couple of questions about that. We know from the story, which I'm going to go drill down in a few minutes, we know the story about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that when he came out of the cave, it was after 12 years, a certain incident happened, which we're going to come back into a minute. He then goes back with his son for a full another year. So at the end of the day, he winds up spending 13 years in the cave. My question is, why didn't he just spend 13 years in the cave? What is the idea that there had to be a kind of 12 plus 1 in order to equal the 13? Another question also is, we know that these 24, according to the Kabbalists, we are told at least, that the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva who died were reincarnations of the 24,000 people who died in the plague of the daughters of Moab. and the time when the prostitutes were able to cause the Jewish people to fall, and it was the whole incident of Pinchas and Cosby and so on, Zimri. So in that incident, 24,000 people died, and the Kabbalists tell us that these 24,000 people all came back as Rebbe Akiva's students, and these were the 24,000 that died again. So the obvious question is, what would be the connection? Why would there be a tikkun, a rectification in the incarnation of something that happened in that incident with the daughters of Moab that somehow found its way to this incident with the students of Rebbe Akiva? And the other question sort of throw out is, why of all of the 5 Talmidim that Rebbe Akiva gives smicha to, why dafka Rebbe Shimon? Why did he become the big standout? Why was he the one that picked up the gauntlet and marched with it? Why not Rebbe Meir? We know that Rebbe Meir, the Stam Mishnah is like Rebbe Meir. We know that all of halacha basically is like Rebbe Meir. So why wouldn't he become the one that is ascribed the kind of visibility that Rebbe Shimon seems to take in the place? So let's take a look at the story. By the way, if you ever want to know, that you always, in learning Torah, or at least especially Gemara, it's called the Yam Shel Torah, a Talmud. It's called the ocean of the Talmud. And the reason of the metaphor is, if you've ever been in the ocean, especially, or a lake even, when you're on the water, everything is flat. It all kind of looks the same. When you go under the water, you can actually see the topography. But when you come back up above the water, you don't see that topography anymore. So when you learn and learn and learn and learn, you might not necessarily remember the topography that lies underneath the water. And therefore, one of the most important ways of learning Talmud is through simanim, is to make little things or tricks in the mind that helps you remember what it is that you actually learn, and they become like buoys that float on the water. So when you see that, immediately you know what lies underneath the water at that point. So an example, this Gemara. This Gemara is found in the Gemara in Shabbat, which is on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. Lag BaOmer. And this, on that page, on 33b, is the story of Rebbe Shimon in the cave. So Rebbe Shimon is in the cave. We're not going to go through the whole story of the cave, although I am going to tell you in a minute, if I had the budget and the little animation I would make out of this. But Rebbe Shimon comes out after 12 years from his cave, and he's there with his son, and all of a sudden they see farmers that are farming the land, and Rebbe Shimon goes, "What? You're giving up your eternal life for just a moment of physical work in this world?" And like laser beams, you know, the eye of the rabbis, they start burning up the whole world. And God says, "Well, I asked you to come out of the cave to destroy my world." And so they realize, oh my gosh, we've done a terrible thing. And what's an amazing thing is they don themselves, they speak about themselves, they call themselves Rishoyim. Do you imagine how great Gedolim really were? That they had no ego, they had no posture, they had no face that they had to worry about. All they lived for was the essence of truth. That Reb Shimon Bar Yochai could call himself a Rasha, and he says even the Rishoyim go to hell for only 12 months. So we are going back in for a 12-month period, and this should be our hell, and it should atone for what we've just done. I mean, the visual I had at least was kind of like, first of all, you have to ask the question, what, there were no farmers before they went into the cave? Jews weren't farmers over almost 1,000 years in the land of Israel. Rebbe Shimon never saw a farmer that they start zapping them, right? So you can just imagine the legend. Here you got like the little, you know, guys out there, little farmers, and it's kind of quiet, and you just hear the sound of mosquitoes or whatever. And then up in the hills, there's that one cave that everyone talks about, the legend of the rabbis who live in the cave. And just one kind of out of the blue day, you know, happened to be the 33rd Omer, but who really counted? You know, and all of a sudden they look and they see emerging from the cave, and they, oh, it's the rabbis, it's the rabbis. And all these little farmers are running, it's the rabbis. And all of a sudden, you know, and all of them, what the, right? And they're all kind of like running for their lives. And now, you know, a year later, you can imagine the farmers kind of like, well, huh? You know, always got a little took, and they're like looking up at the cave, making sure the rabbis aren't coming back out. And now all of a sudden the rabbis come back out. Oh, okay. So the question was, what was it that the rabbis saw after the 13th year that they didn't see prior to that? So the answer to this is a very interesting idea. The concept of the number 12 represents every facet of creation. And this is why there are 12 months in the year. And this is why when you have a 4-digit word that has 2 repetitive digits, you're going to have a 12 possibility of combination. And there's even an AABC. How many ways you can combine those letters, ABCA, ACBA, and so on, is going to be 12. It's going to be 3 times 4. So in the name of God, which has the double letter Hey, and it's 4 digits, so therefore every possibility of God's name being remanifest is going to be 12. And each one of these names of God is a different force, if you will, behind the energy of each one of these different months. And that's why the months break down into the 4 seasons, because each season is therefore controlled by one of these 4 letters. So therefore, as your person blesses the new moon of each new year, of each new month, they're actually bringing down a different aspect or energy into this world. But there's a concept of 13, which is not just 1 plus 12, but 13 is what we call a Clal. It is the capsulization of everything. And this is why when we have a double Adar, the name of God's combination, which we focus on the 2nd month of Adar, is actually all 12 combinations as one. Because the number 13 puts all of the 12 actually together. So when Reb Shimon had come out of the cave, Reb Shimon had reached such a high spiritual level that he could no longer relate to why people would waste even a breath of their life with a physical, mundane earth. In fact, if you want to know another interesting Gemara of Reb Shimon, also on Daf Lamed Bet, Lamed Gimel, but this time in the Gemara Brachot, there's an argument between Rebbe Shimon and the Tanoim as to whether or not a person should learn Torah full-time, or if a person should learn Torah part-time and get a job. And the Gemara even says many people tried to do like Reb Shimon. They tried to sit and learn full-time, but they were unable to do it financially. And so therefore the Gemara itself, I guess people sort of forgot this Gemara, the Gemara itself, selective Judaism, the Gemara itself says that we follow the opinion that go get a job and learn Torah, learn it on your own cheshbon.
Rebbe Shimon, isn't it?
Yes, it's Rebbe Shimon, correct. So therefore, when Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai came out, he was on the level though that, not like Rebbe Shmuel, he was on the level that people should just have that 100% dvegut and emunah and faith in the Kodesh Baruch Hu, that they can break asunder all the laws of nature and cling directly to the divine presence. And therefore there was no tolerance to him anymore, to seemingly what would appear to be a chilul, a desecration of this high holiness. But when he came back out after the 13th time, he had now reached the level of 13. And 13 is the gematria of the word echad. He was able to understand the whole principle of the Torah is to teach us unity, because unity is the modus operandus that brings us to peace, shalom, which is the ultimate blessing. That every single time we see a political issue or some other issue arise, even in our land today, that the first impact is to split us into different camps, right away we've both lost. In fact, if you look, a very beautiful insight into the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah says that any argument that is not for the true sake of heaven will not last, and any argument which is for the true sake of heaven will last. And the example that it brings of an argument for the sake of heaven is between Shammai and Hillel. And the argument that it brings, which is not for the sake of heaven, is Korach and his merry men. Now you would think the Mishnah would have said Korach and Moshe, right? Those were the two sides. No, Moshe never fought Korach. Moshe even went to his men and tried to convince them not to die. Moshe wasn't involved in the fight. Only they were interested in the fight. This is a very interesting thing. Whenever you see issues that start to have Jews fight against Jews, step back and really ask yourself, is this l'shem shamayim? Is this really trying to build something to make us love each other more? Is it working towards echad? Because the number 13 is also the gematria of ahava, of love. So through understanding unity comes the creation of this idea of love. Now the Zohar tells us that in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu secluded himself for 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai in order to receive the revealed Torah, when Reb Shimon went into the cave, he received the hidden Torah. This was the Zohar. His experience in the cave ultimately created that experience which would ultimately lead to the revelation of the Zohar. So I want to just tell you something. I have to quote the source, and I'm very careful all the time not to get into politics, especially religious politics, and especially not in this country. I think after the Vietnam War, I was sort of burnt out forever on these things. But I just want to tell you this. There is a Rebbe in Jerusalem known as the BaOmer Rebbe. And the BaOmer Rebbe quoted the Khatam Sofer. Now the reason I want to tell you who quotes him is because, yes, the BaOmer Rebbe falls into what you imagine of the other side of Rehov Yafo, the Haredi black side. And therefore I thought it was more important to know that he quoted this Khatam Sofer than, let's say, Mosdot Rev Kook, which you would expect would quote the following Khatam Sofer on the cover of their books. But the Khatam Sofer said that any Jew, doesn't matter a Yarmulke or not, any Jew who plants a tree in Eretz Yisrael that bears fruit has fulfilled a commandment on the level of putting on tefillin. It's an amazing insight. And this is by one of the real Gedolim of the Khatam Sofer. So what happened was that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, when he first came out after the 12 years, he had become so excluded in his ivory tower, if you will, although his Torah was unbelievable, although it was the highest of the highest, it had detached from that which is so simple and so beautiful and so pure. There was a story, I don't know if you're familiar with the Ashlag, the Sulam. He wrote the Kahati on the Zohar. And the Sulam was one of the great Mekubalim of just the last generation here in Eretz Yisrael. And he was a little bit looked at sometimes askance because he had a tremendous love of the secular Zionists, which the rest of his camp could not understand. And there's a story that was told that one day the students came in and they were all laughing. And they asked, the Ashlag asked them, why were they laughing? And he says, those crazy Zionists, this is like the 1950s, they're going to the Negev and they think they're going to start growing food and trees and fruit and flowers. And the Ashlag says, Baruch Hashem. And they looked at the Ashlag and said, what do you mean, Baruch Hashem? How are you possibly going to grow things in the desert? And the Ashlag said, what do you mean? They're going to pray. He says, pray? These guys don't even keep Shabbat. Pray? What do you mean pray? He says, yes, they're going to do the holiest of holy prayer. They're going to take a seed and they're going to put it into the ground. There's no greater prayer than that. To believe that taking a seed and putting it to the ground will bear fruit, that is a level of tremendous emunah. So this is the metaphor that's going on here. Rebbe Shimon, how to reconnect to the holiness of all Jews, no matter who they are, what they look like on the outside or whatever, nobody knows. Only Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what the potential of our nation is all about in each one of us. And therefore, when it's taught, V'ahavta l'recha chomacha, it means when we have to love our neighbors like we love ourselves, we have to love our neighbors the way God loves each one of us. Because God sees beyond the external. God sees the internal. And inside that internal is Tselem Elokim, is the image of God. What could be more amazing than that? So therefore, when we look at other people and we look at our friends and we see bad things in each other, that's easy. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to find problems in other people or other groups. That's easy. What the challenge is to circumcise your eyes and to see deeper than what you see on the surface and find that which is so beautiful and loved by God in every single person, regardless if they're religious or not religious. That's nonsense. Everybody is holy to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Not only every Jew, every person, because there's only one God who makes all of us. So therefore, when we understand the beauty and find that central point, that becomes the point of unity of Echad. And once we touch that point of unity of Echad, that becomes the point of love. And this was the problem of Rebbe Akiva's Talmidim. And why the Gilgul? Why the reincarnation? Which, by the way, is also 33, Gilgul. So why this idea? Because it says, the Maharal explains, I think I said this in the last class, I know everybody remembers since Hanukkah, but I will share for the new faces, that it says that there are really only two sins. One is a sin of the body, it all melts down to a sin of the body, and one is the sin of the soul. And the sin of the body is immorality, and the sin of the soul is idolatry. And really the Maharal says it all boils down to the sin of the soul, which is idolatry. Because the ultimate sin was not the eating of the apple or the wine or the wheat or whatever the commentators pointed to be. The original sin, in a word, was chutzpah. Was when God comes to Adam and Eve and says, "Que pasa, Señor?" Instead of taking on responsibility, they turned around and passed the buck. That chutzpah, that arrogance, what leads to a person which ultimately in a physical form can lead to immorality. God says no, but I say yes. Hey, equal footing. And so therefore what happened was the Jews who had lost the vision at what had happened at Sinai and fell into the circumstances where the daughter of Moab had gotten to such a level of ego, of ga'ava, that they were able to submerge themselves in relationships that God has said, hey, just don't do that. It's very interesting, just as a side point, we break down in many ways the mitzvot, and one of the categories of breaking down the mitzvot is bein adam lachavero and bein adam lamakom, between people and between people and God. You find this a lot in many Western law systems as well. And what's interesting is when you look, let's say in American law, at immorality, it's usually classified as between people, and therefore if you have consenting adults, right? Somehow consenting adult is a phrase that gets you out of jail for free. Might not save you if the husband walks in with a shotgun. Consenting adult, okay, boom. But at least in a court, it might help you. But the idea of consenting adult suggests that immorality is an issue between people and people. But Rashi says clearly not like that. Rashi says that immorality has nothing to do with people and people. Rashi says clearly immorality is all about bein adam lamakom, between a person and God. Simply will a person listen to what God says. So therefore these neshamot now come back as the 24,000 of students of Rebbe Akiva. And what are they doing? They're tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. They're scholars. And they're working very, very hard on themselves in order to make themselves, because this is a magical period of time, the counting of the Omer. As the Bnei Yissaschar points out, there are 32 days until Lag BaOmer, which is the gematria of heart. And now there's 17 days from Lag BaOmer to Shavuot, which is the gematria of Tov. So the whole purpose of life is to fix one's character traits to have a good heart. Like the Mishnah where Rebbe asks, what is the way for a person to go? And all the Talmidim, Rebbe Yochanan, and all the Talmidim give different examples. It's the heart which is the one that supersedes everything, because the heart is the one that manifests everything. So the whole idea of the Omer is the building of the good heart. So here they are working on each other, but they forgot at the same time that they were discovering how holy they were supposed to simultaneously understand how holy everybody else was as well. And that's where they lost that sense of chibur, that sense of unity, to be able to bring themselves together. Reb Shimon steps out and becomes the leader in a very interesting Gemara. In the same Gemara that we discussed a minute ago, we talked about the idea of him in the cave. The story now goes a little bit forward. After he's come out of the cave, he bumps into his father-in-law, Reb Pinchas ben Yair. And Reb Pinchas right away notices that he basically, at this point, Reb Shimon has elephant skin. Because they lived for all of these years buried in the sand with just up to their head, and there was a little river and carob was able to drop out. I mean, maybe it was chocolate, but carob might be a little hard. Anyhow, but they lived like that. But they were tzaddikim, so they could handle it. So they lived like that, so their skin became completely ruined. So Reb Pinchas right away is trying to do all kinds of oils and ointments and so on to heal the skin. But what happens is he starts to cry, and the salt from the tears is falling into the cracks of the skin of Reb Shimon, causing him pain. And Reb Pinchas says, woe to me that I see you, Reb Shimon, like this. And Reb Shimon turns around and says, woe to you, what are you talking about? Fortunate are you to see me like this. Because I am like this, I have now become Reb Shimon. Meaning what? Because I have now understood the suffering in my own life, I can relate to the suffering of others. Reb Soloveitchik asks an interesting question. Why did Yehuda become the leader of the Jewish people as we start marching out of Egypt? Why not Joseph? Joseph is the one who saved the gang. Joseph was the one who got kicked out by his brothers. Joseph was the one who hung tight in Egypt. Joseph is the one that took care of everybody. Joseph was the one who arranged for everything. Why didn't Joseph become the leader? Why did Yehuda become the leader? And he answers as follows. That yes, it's true that Joseph had a terrible Yetzer Hara, and he was able in the end to finally control himself, but Yehuda wasn't. Yehuda also had a Yetzer Hara, but he didn't control himself. He went for it. He dove in. And guess what? As a result of that, Yehuda did tshuva. So since Yehuda had within himself the human experience of failure, and was able to convert failure into success, it meant that as a leader, he could be sensitive to everybody's problems. Yosef was too beyond it. Yosef couldn't really understand. Yosef would say, like Nancy Reagan, just say no, right? He would say, what do you mean? Of course you got a Yetzer Hara, just fight it. But Yehuda would understand, no, it's not so easy to always fight your Yetzer Hara. And sometimes the Yetzer Hara wins. And so therefore it has to be that when he wins, you have to ultimately make sure that you win. Because you take that experience and you convert it into life. So Reb Shimon, coming out of the cave, had now gotten to the point where he became two people for Am Yisrael. The Zohar says that when the Hachamim came into Kerem B'Yavna, the first thing that they said was, they said, we see in the future that the Jewish people will forget the Torah. And Reb Shimon steps up and he says that the Jewish people will never forget the Torah because it says in the verse so and so and so and so, which basically was then they will never be forgotten. But the interesting thing about the verse is that the last letter of every one of those words spells the name Yochai. So Shimon Bar Yochai became responsible in the way, if you will, of being able to make sure that the Torah would last for all of the generations. And at the same time, in the Gemara in Eruvin, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said that if it was up to me, I would actually make sure that no person ever suffered in this world throughout all of creation. That he was saying that all the suffering that I went through, I would be able to take this and elevate it to heal the whole world. Now I want to read something. This is the kind of thing, like, unless you, this is maybe why I don't learn Zohar. Because I have a hard time with these kind of stories. But this is like, way before they ever created Lucas Studios. This is what like our children and our parents were growing up with. But I want to read this insight. This is an amazing story from the Zohar. So, Rebbe Shimon once saw a cloud of darkness descend upon the world, choking off all the light. He said to Rebbe Eliezer, which is his son, he said, let us go and see what a Kodesh Baruch Hu. By the way, I always love that name, a Kodesh Baruch Hu, because you didn't know that God was Chinese. Let us go and see what a Kodesh Baruch Hu intends to do with his world. They went out and they found an angel in the appearance of a monstrous ox with 30 jets of fire shooting from its mouth. Why have you come, Reb Shimon asked it. I have come to destroy the world since there are not 30 tzaddikim in this generation to support it, the angel said. This was a Kodesh Baruch Hu's decree to Abraham, that the world would not endure with less than 30 tzaddikim, because it says, it will be, and that is the numerical value of 30. Please return to Kodesh Baruch Hu and tell him that Bar Yochai walks the land, says Reb Shimon. The angel returns to Hashem, and he says, by the way, I have to tell you, this has got to be the coolest angel, because every time you always learn these like heavenly things, go and tell them. So they actually go and tell them, and you always wonder, well, why do they have to go and tell them? Well, the angel was actually hip to this. Listen to the angel. The angel says, the angel returns to God and he says, Master of the universe, it is already known to you what Reb Shimon Bar Yochai told me to say. Right? Anyhow, right? Okay. Those of you that are familiar with these kind of stories will appreciate the insight of the angel. So go destroy the world and pay no heed to Bar Yochai, God responds. When they came back to the world again, Reb Shimon saw it and he said, if you do not depart, I will decree that you will never again be allowed to return to heaven, and you will be banished to Azel, which is one of the words for hell, and worse, you're going to love this, and if that's not bad enough, I'm going to banish you to Aza. Okay. So go back to a Kodesh Baruch Hu and tell him if there are not 30 generations, then let 20 be good enough, and so on and so on. And if there's not 20, then 10. And if there's not that, then let it be me and my son. Because it's written by the words of two witnesses, the Devar, the matter shall stand. And Devar means the world. So by the word of God, the world was created. And then when it says, and if it wasn't for the two of us, if that's not good enough, then let just me, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, be enough, because the tzaddik is the foundation of the entire world. And so the voice comes from heaven and says, great is your merit, Rebbe Shimon, that a Kodesh Baruch Hu makes his decrees from above, and you annul them from below. Surely of what it is said, those that will fear you, God will do. And then it ends by saying that Rebbe Shimon's prayer succeeded even where the prayers of Abraham failed, because Abraham was unable to save Sodom, and yet Rebbe Shimon, with less than 10 tzaddikim, was able to save the entire world. And so these are the two mantles that Reb Shimon now becomes the leader of all of Am Yisrael. He becomes the one who ensures that the Torah will never disappear from the Jewish people. When we know that the Torah says the word Tov is Torah, and we also know that the other word Tov is Tzaddik, and we know that these are the 17 days that we live in. So one last point, and then we'll put it all together. How does this tie together with the number 33? So the number 33, we'll break it down first as an algorithm. Begins with the number 3, or we'll start with the number 3, it's the small of the two. So number 3 always represents a circle, as the way number 4 always represents a square. So the idea of the circle is that which is, and symbolized by the word gal, means to roll, is a wave, is a frequency, is sound waves, is light waves. It are all the things that create this world of the illusion that we see and we live inside. And therefore, this world that we live in is the root gal of the word galut. It's the exile. The creation is that which actually hides the revelation of God. But as one lives only in this world, in the cyclic nature of this world, if a person never figures out what are you living for, this is the Gilgul. Then you come back as reincarnated. I saw a cute little cartoon the other day. It was called Reformed Buddhists. And it said, get it right this time and don't be reincarnated. So there's this idea of Gilgul, of going over and over and over. But if you actually find the Echad, if you find the center, then the word Gal becomes Go'al, which is Ge'ulah. It's the redemption. And so therefore there's the power within this idea of the world of the 33, of that which continually rolls and rolls. And we know that 3, the Maharal points out, 3 times 10, any number times 10 means the peak of that within this 3 is the power of the 30. That's the Lamed. And the Lamed is the learning and the teaching process that we go through. And the way that the scribe writes the Lamed, unlike any other letter, he begins at the bottom of the line, draws halfway up, then goes to the top and draws down. Meaning, as King David said, God is my shadow. As we make life in this world, God will manifest the revelation according to our efforts. So as we make the efforts to learn, so will the heaven reward us. So there's this process of being able to open up the heavens before us. And these are the 5 points of Lag BaOmer, all rectified through this formula. Watch. The 24,000 students, although they appreciated their own holiness, did not see holiness in each other, and therefore they died. But when they reached the moment of the 33, the dying stops, because now the Tov begins. Reb Shimon becomes the leader of all the 5 people that Rebbe Akiva gives the smicha to, because he discovers the love of every single Jew. And this was the teaching of Rebbe Akiva, V'ahavta l'recha chomocha. And why does Rebbe Akiva call it Clal Gadol? You ever wonder that? Call it Davar Gadol. Why does he call it a Klal? The answer is the Ramban in Parshas Kadoshim says that the 10 commandments are actually found in the Parsha. And when he goes through the sources of each one of them, when he comes to the last commandment, do not covet, he says, V'ahavta l'recha chomocha is that commandment. Why? Because when you love your neighbor, you have no jealousy. Not only are you not jealous, you're actually thankful for their success. So therefore, the Ahavta l'recha chomocha is the way to overcome the 10th commandment. And since it's the 10th commandment, it's the klal of the first 9. And so the real process of the 10 commandments is not to become a big shot Baal Tshuva overnight. Yo, God, yo, I'm here. Okay, yo, we're tight. I believe in God. You know, my tzitzis are like dragging on the ground. It's the idea is to go the other way. First begin with your friend. Yo, I'm here. I love you. Start with the 10th commandment. Start with stopping this hatred and stopping this jealousy and stopping all this fighting. Lose that through V'ahavta l'recha chomocha. And then you'll climb the ladder. So when you get to a knowing God, God will be very glad to know you as well. That is the process. And that's why the man begins to fall on this day. Because the Torah tells us that only the generation that ate the man was able to receive the Torah. Now we begin the process of climbing the 17 days to be able to reach the Torah of what this is all about on Shavuot. And when we're able to really reach inside ourselves, we will reach that point. We will reveal that which is hidden. And that which is hidden is capsulated in the Zohar, which was the other event of Lag BaOmer. So I really hope that with all of us, we find ourselves moving now from having found the heart of the first 32 days, now into the realm of the Tov, discovering the Torah for ourselves, to discover the tzaddik in ourselves and to discover the tzaddik in each one of us. Thank you very much. Lag Someach. If there are any questions, Yonah will be happy to.
Do we have any questions?
I heard somebody say Moda Ani. What?
I always find with your, this is only the second one, but I always find there's so much to like absorb, and which is very good. Thank you, Yonah, as always, for videoing it, because we can all go to YouTube or Shiur and Shmooze page and review everything. Did you?
I did, yes.
Did anybody not count the Omer?
Anybody like to count the Omer for everybody who hasn't said it yet?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh yeah, people do.
Well, Yonah.